Hello, and welcome to Right to Be Wrong, the show that revives the art of conversation, accommodating varied views on sports, culture, politics, world events, and every topic under the sun. After all, you have a right to be wrong. Here are your hosts, Dave and Tony.
Tone, the Sir Tony, I should say, of Bean County.
Yes.
How are you, Bean Counter?
Still busy, mate. Where are we? Somewhere in August, so June 30.
You must be. You dress like a bean counter, right? You got like a bean counter jumper on. It's like part zipper, it's part jumper, it's a bit of everything.
Bit of a feel, yeah. No, it's all good. Been busy. Back end of the soccer season for the kids. Back end of my soccer season. Weekends are about to be freed up. Weather's about to get a bit warmer, even though we are being washed away in Sydney
The
this
rain's
week.
unbelievable.
I know.
Just keeps coming.
I know. So, Dave, what are you going to lecture me on tonight?
Well, Tone, I'll lecture you on anything you ever want, but I think tonight we're going to talk about what created us, what created Gen Z.
Indeed. So let's talk, Dave. No, not Gen Z.
Sorry.
Gen X.
I apologise.
Yeah.
See, this is what happens, Tone. I'm just getting over. That cough is nearly gone. I think I've still got a little bit of brain fog. So that was my screw up. See, I can be wrong sometimes, Tone.
I'm shocked.
We're going to have to make this a really big, important episode and go, look, Dave fucked up.
I'm shocked, Dave. Who are we, Dave?
We are Gen X.
1965 to 1980, loosely.
Yeah. We're Gen X.
What
Best generation ever.
did we do growing up? Ride our BMX bikes,
We didn't whinge.
watch a bit of Countdown,
There was no crying.
go to Civic Video, get a video.
Civic, we used to go to Captain Hook's video to get the VHS.
You know,
We played until the lights were on. Those were the rules. So you went to school. After school, the rules were be home by the time the street lights were on. That was it. Free range children.
So we lived through Whitlam, the dismissal, some Hawke Keating reform, the 80s, the global, like the decentralization of our economy, or the floating of the dollar and the decentralization of financial services.
Yeah, but were you thinking of any of that stuff when you were
I was at the time. I was a very, very...
You've always been a nerd.
I was very hooked into that. And we're caught in between. Who are we caught in between, Dave? The boomers on one side?
And the millennials and Gen Z on the other.
Yeah.
So, which is interesting. That three very different generations. I think the boomers cop a lot of crap unnecessarily, and we'll discuss that as we move forward tonight.
No. There's going to be no unnecessary with the boomers. They need a good kicking.
Well, I think part of the problem is that's what they got, because you got to remember the boomers are the generation that are the children of the war parents, Second World War parents, and it's something that I saw with my father being the eldest son of. There was 9 kids. He was the eldest boy. There was an elder girl, and his father was a soldier in the Second World War. And you kind of, to me, I think the boomers, we always talk like there's a narrative that they had it so easy, that everything was given to them and things were so cheap and whatnot. And there's an element of truth to some things, but it's not something that was made for them that way. That was just the circumstance. But there was a lot of other stuff that was a lot tougher that they did. You know, some of the toughness of growing up when you have a father that was a soldier in the Borneo jungle, or was fighting on the front in Europe. Like, these men didn't come home, were all lovey-dovey, warm, hug my boy, be proud of you, the things that we do, right? It just didn't happen. So I think that the baby boomers, to a certain extent, actually had things a lot harder than what many do. But then there are other things we can easily say, well, you enjoyed the fruits of it and then you shut the gate after you went through. That's the problem that I think.
Yeah. And I didn't, like, in preparing for tonight, I didn't realize there was a generation before the boomers.
Yep, there's many. The world didn't start in the boomers.
The silent generation.
Yep.
Grew up during the Great Depression, World War II, values shaped by scarcity, discipline, and loyalty.
Yep.
Where's that gone? Like, if you put that in the context of today.
It's nearly non-existent. And I'd say that one of the reasons why, for me, what created Gen X is that we still had discipline. So in school, you still got the cane or the strap. You had respect for police. You'd still call them sir, and you wouldn't. You certainly wouldn't give them the finger or spit in their face or tell them to fuck off or some of the things you see people do today. Just generally, I think we had a nice balance between freedom and discipline. And I think after us is when things have started. The helicopter parent came in, the lack of free play, the lack of accountability and resilience built into a child by letting them have that free play. So I think for us, the things that made us were probably having parents that were much, for the most part, were much tougher or grew up in tougher times, or grandparents that grew up in tougher times.
And what are some of the attributes of Gen X? Like growing up, I thought, pretty practical, pretty
We're funny.
Oh,
We've got for the most part, most Gen Xers have a good sense of humor.
They can laugh at themselves.
Very self-deprecating. Have a gallows humor.
Yeah, generally speaking,
a good dark humor.
Can laugh at themselves. Don't take life too seriously, but take parts of their lives very seriously because they understand the impacts of stuffing some stuff up.
Yeah, well, you would understand as a first generation of migrant parents that how tough their life was and what you inherently take in growing up in that environment, right? Because there's a certain amount that comes about from the way in which they raise you, the things they say to you, the discipline they put into you. But then there's other stuff that you just absorb because that's what life is, right? So your mum, for example, wouldn't have been someone that in today's dollars could go out and buy herself $1,000 pair of shoes or go out to the races and spend $2,000 because it's Melbourne Cup to dress up. Like that kind of concept to someone like your mum would just be an alien point of view. And it wasn't because there was a patriarchal society that meant mum was chained to the kitchen and dad was out drinking all the money and betting it. It's because they didn't speak the language fluently. They were building a completely new life. There was one income. They're building it in another world. So the things that they went through, it wasn't handed to them. It wasn't easy. And the irony is that part of what makes you what you are and many other first generation is because you see how tough they had it and the love and support they gave you and the life they want to be better for you. And then you grab it with both hands and you make every post a winner. And I think that's one of the things that we don't do now is we hand everything to the kids, and often from our heart, right? It's not that there's an intent there to destroy our children. It's from the heart. But sometimes we need to pull back and realize that part of our own success is because everything wasn't handed to us. And that's what we probably need to revert back to in some way.
Yeah, it's a good point you raise. How did we get to the point, or where did we go wrong potentially from this desire to make the most of the opportunities provided to you by your parents and their sacrifice to an expectation or an entitlement that things will be handed to you when times get tough?
I think there's multiple variables, right? So the first thing in what probably started the helicopter parenting, Jonathan Haidt in his book, The Coddling of the American Mind, lays that out. And what he effectively puts it back to is the missing child's face on the milk carton in the US. So every time a woman opens a fridge or a parent opens a fridge, missing child, missing child, missing child. So it started to create this fear that you can't let your child walk down the street on their own or play on their own, where the irony is the data that kids are most at risk from someone within the family. So it's something like 90%, 97% of people, children that something goes wrong, it's a family member. So that's one variable. I think the hyper-financialization of the world. So in the 70s, when Nixon in the US closes the gold window and we start to get more easily available credit, and then everything becomes more about consumption. We've had a whole episode on citizen versus consumer. So that's one variable. I think within the human psyche, there's a design flaw within us from the maker, whoever that may be, whatever you believe in, but there's a design flaw that it's never enough. Yeah, someone could end up on $1 million a week and they think, no, there's people I'm hanging out with, they're making twice as much as me. I'm worth more. So I think that's part of the problem as well. And then I think on a political level, we were correcting for some of the wrongs of the past. So going back to past generations where we had, ethno-state and true fascism and Nazism and things like that. And as we moved away from that, then we overcorrected and we went too far where, everything's about, you get a trophy because you participated, not because you earned anything. So I think those four main variables, and there are plenty of others that you could probably throw in with it, but that's what starts to erode this ability to allow kids to develop on their own. The legal aspect, that's another big one, I should say, because, for example, I was having a conversation with the Mauritian Queen about this the other day, that I said to her, she was packing the little man's lunch, and me being me, when I'm shopping and something's half price, because I never had it as a kid, I'll overbuy it and so he can have it. So I said to her, put some extra in there that he can share with all his mates. And she says, oh, no, they're not allowed to share at school.
That's right.
I'm like, what's going on? Your kids can't share at school. They've taken all the monkey bars and things out so they don't get hurt. Like, what are you raising your kids to do? So, and I understand people go, oh, there's a peanut allergy, Dave. Well, that's been proven that the peanut allergy came about through not exposing people to peanuts. Yeah. So now the medical advice is the other way. So all these sorts of things, if you go to a primary school, why are kids not falling off monkey bars and breaking an arm? Why are kids not able to go over to their friend that doesn't have enough food and share with them? What the hell are we doing?
Yeah, where did we go wrong, right?
To me, that's a big one. So, and I understand the legislation would be behind that. So as a government, our government should be changing that and saying, actually, you know what, to get around this, because some parents go, I don't want my kid on the monkey bars. Okay, well, you can have an opt-out. So what we'll do is you sign something that says, like for me, I can sign and say, the little man's allowed to play on the monkey bars. I accept responsibility if he breaks an arm. And if you don't want that, well, you don't sign that waiver, and therefore the parents will say to little Sarah, little Jimmy, your parents won't let you, right? And that's fine. And I think the same thing, I think we need the strap or the cane back in school. But again, I don't want to force that on people that disagree, and I don't want my kid just being belted every Friday because it's Friday. But if he got to the point there was something that needed to be done, I'd be happy to have an opt-in and go, yep, on the proviso you can justify the reason I don't have an issue. So I think those sorts of things are taking away that ability of a child to explore, be creative, have fun, learn to deal with pain, turn up to school with a cast on your arm and get it signed, all the cool stuff that just happened. Ironically, my great-nephew saw me today, and he's just busted his arm, fell off a ladder yesterday. He's only 7, 8. But I think those sorts of things are part of what made us successful, because we learned to deal with pain. We took risks. We shared all that sort of stuff.
So, Dave, we've spoken a lot around in previous podcasts how there's an increasing level of distrust in government and institutions. And you could argue like the boomers had no choice, right? They had to follow, right? They had to follow government. There was almost like implied trust. Everything they say, we're just going to do. Vaccines, we're just going to do. We're going to go to war, whatever it might be. Is it fair to say that Gen X were a little bit more distrustful of government and public institutions? And is that the start of the slippery slope where we end up now, where there's a high level of distrust amongst public institutions and government on the back of people potentially being more aware or people being more ignorant? But was Gen X the start of that slippery slope? And why were we the first to kind of go, not sure?
I think that we started off quite trusting because, as I mentioned, when we grew up, right, you didn't question authority. That didn't happen. And by authority, that was by extension your neighbours, right? If you were rude to your neighbours would tell your parents and you'd be in trouble. So I don't think that the distrust was there when we were younger. I think the distrust came about as we were older. And I think with both things you said, it was through both information and ignorance. So I think, and part of that too is, I've mentioned this before in another episode, that I think one of the issues we've got to is we moved away. One of the big things I'd say that started to happen was a lot of faith started to come out of society. Right, so people were less, I'll use the term religious, but what I mean by that is their faith. Now, that doesn't mean I'm saying there's a God, there's a Jesus Christ, here's what it is. It could be whatever. It could be Islam, it could be Judaism, it could be Hinduism. But the morality that is inherently built in all those faiths sort of gives you a moral compass on how you engage with others and how you live your life. As we moved away from that and we get into the legal aspect, which is the compliance and the over-regulation. So we don't, for example, we don't say your kid fell off the monkey bars at school and he broke his arm, and you go, yeah, you know what? It happens. We then got to, what are my legal rights? Were there teachers there? Did the teacher say he shouldn't? How are your monkey bars set up? Do you have a soft landing underneath? So all these things we moved away from. A kid has an inherent right to go and climb and be a kid. And as a parent, we accept that to be a good parent, our children are going to get hurt sometimes, physically, emotionally, mentally, and that's part of the journey and we're there for them. That all that, to me, is built into like a moral compass, an understanding of excuse me, an understanding of the realities of life. So once we get into that legal aspect, and I've mentioned this to you before in two things where I've said in a boardroom, who really asks now when a product or service is created, not is this compliant, but is this right? And we had effectively like a two-part thing on politics where your position was the government's one, the government can do what wants. And I said, yes, they can, but that's a break of the social contract because on that basis you can go and drop the legal age of consent to 10. So for me, that's probably the biggest through line in our time, in our generation, that I would say has been broken. And then that creates that distrust, because then we start to think everyone has this legal obligation to do things the right way and protect us and the safety and so on and so forth.
And another issue I was thinking around, like I know my parents' generation were effectively live to work, right? Basically, work is an absolute priority because work provides a whole raft of things, basic necessities.
Well, there was no social security that you could turn into a
That's
career.
right. So it's basically just do what you got to do.
Had nothing.
Yeah, exactly. So do what you got to do to provide for your kids, provide for your family, set some aside for whatever it might be. Compromise and maybe don't go on the holiday or go on one less holiday or no holiday at all. Wind back on the takeaway. Everything was pretty basic for us, right?
But we were happier.
That's right. Whereas now, I know my generation and to a lesser extent my kids, but I'm more selfish. I'm at an age now where I'm thinking, no, I'm going to go on that holiday. Thanks. No, we're going out for dinner tonight. Yeah, we're getting takeaway, right?
But I don't think that's selfish.
Yeah.
Because if each generation is doing their generation well, the one behind you lives better.
Yeah.
The problem we've now hit is the ones coming through will not live better. So that's where these conversations are coming in, right? Because it's, well, who's at fault? And that's not to finger point, because this is where I think the boomers get a little bit too much of boomer, yeah, boomer. And there's plenty of poor boomers, right? Your parents are boomers.
Yeah, that's right.
So would you turn around and say they had everything handed to them?
No, not at all.
Did they go through university free?
No, not at all.
Should they now be having to sell up and move their house that they work like dogs to pay off over these years just because it happens to now be in a part of Sydney that's very central to our second CBD?
No, but what I would argue is if they were sitting on $3.5 million worth of superannuation and they were using superannuation as some type of tax haven, that's wrong. They should be paying their fair share.
No, but I'm not talking about like superannuation, right? Because if you've got $3 million when you're retired and all other assets, you're doing okay.
That's right.
But what I mean is, because what we start to see is people that live in homes for 40 or 50 years. The home's a big block because that's what they were, because at the Second World War we were 7 million people. We weren't 27 million. So people didn't want it, like where your parents live and where my grandparents lived and where my parents lived, we were considered way out. People didn't want to. But blocks were bigger, right? So they go and they buy where they can afford to live. They work hard to pay it off. And it happens to be Sydney grows 20 million people in their lifetime, and their block falls into, say, a development zone. Now, I have no issue. We call it progress. We say we're growing. That's fine. But why do you force those people who have been there 50 years and say, oh, well, you've got a big block and you're a boomer and I don't have anything, so I'm going to force you out of your family home so I get a shot?
Yeah.
Right?
And I think...
Now, if that was, for example, their fifth or sixth home, and you say, well, they own all these other... It's a different conversation. But this is the family home that someone's worked very hard for, and through circumstances, nothing to do with them. They didn't create Australian immigration policy. They didn't create Australian tax policy. They didn't create the land sizes. They come from Italy, work hard and made a life. And then 50 years later, you've got to hear some 20-year-old go, okay, boomer,
Yeah, I get it.
And this is what I mean by the defense of boomers,
Yeah.
right? There's too much of it that it's people need to understand the nuance of when you say, okay, boomer, well, what do you mean by that?
Yeah. I'm thinking more people, and we'll touch on this in another podcast.
Can you touch me? I love when you touch on me, Tony.
I'm thinking more around people getting their knickers in a knot when there could be like a high-rise development, right? And people get a bit finicky about it. No, not near me. And we can touch on that in another podcast. But getting back to the point, Dave, I said selfish. We're more conscious. Selfish is probably the wrong term. We're more conscious of work-life balance and the fact that we have worked really hard and we want to enjoy it, right? And it's not all around I'm living just to work. No.
Because the generation before us made it better for us, right?
That's right.
Because we got internet, so we don't line up at the post office to pay a bill.
Yeah. And I'm conscious of the fact that I'm trying to make it better for my kids, right? So that they get some opportunities as well, which is all good. But there seems to be like an acceleration in some of these things that Gen X might have kicked off in terms of awareness being, there's better work-life balance, bit of skepticism towards government and distrust of public institutions. There seems to have been like an acceleration of some of these things into the next generations, being Gen Z and Gen Y, whatever it is, whatever they call themselves now. So as the opportunities for one generation to pass on to the next generation better opportunities, as those opportunities either diminish or reduce, it creates this generational wall, and that plays out in government policy, right?
Definitely, because government policy is where's the majority of my votes.
That's right.
Not what's right, what's nation building, what's opportunity for the generations to come. It's who's voting in the next cycle. How many of them are there? Which policy fits best for them?
That's right, and that's why, like in Australia specifically, people are so hooked on, certain cohorts who are well enough, who've got sufficient funding, are hooked into multiple investment properties, and they leverage that, and they've got the capacity to invest heavily on behalf of their kids to set them up. And then my only concern with that type of approach, when we don't correct this intergenerational inequality, I just think it drives a massive divide between the have and have-nots, and it makes it really hard to close that gap again. So I think that's my biggest concern about all this generational stuff, is that it creates divides, and the opportunities that a 21-year-old's got now to get into the Sydney property market, which are almost non-existent, were never an issue for 23 or 24-year-old Tony 30 years ago.
No, I think you're correct, right? That's what the crux of the issue is. The issue is creating, two things. It's not necessarily an intergenerational divide, even though that's how it may look and manifest itself. It's a class divide, right? Because if generation to generation, they just keep getting, dad dies and I got 3 houses. I die and I gave my kids 5. They died, they give them 10. That's not really intergenerational in terms of it's the problem. It's the wealth. It's the class thing, right? So there's a few things. I agree 100% with that, and I think that's where the money is of the problem we need to solve in Western society, because it's across US, UK, Western Europe, Australia. Now, I'll start with a few things though to be clear. If you started with nothing, you now own 10 properties, right, through your own blood, sweat, and tears, I don't have any issue with that. If you've been able to negatively gear and have your taxes help build that portfolio, I don't have any issue with that. My issue is not with the person that plays the game within the rules that are currently set. My issue is with the people who are setting these rules, right? So this is where the okay boomer stuff, and I'm using that basis, we're talking about the boomers now, you'd say, own multiple properties and have all these tax benefits. Well, if they've only played the rules that were made, is it their fault? So this is where the government has let us down. And the reason why the government's let us down is in Australia, and this was something out of Leith Van Onselen at Macro Business that I learned from him, is that about 30 years ago, 66%, 2/3 of bank financing was for business, and 33% was mortgages. That's now inverted. So in other words, the government set things up in such a way that with population growth and investment strategy it meant that they pushed money towards that rather into other productive businesses and whatnot, and therefore, house prices don't have a hockey stick incline. The other thing is the governments are the one that just refuse to put the brakes on immigration until we can play catch up and get enough housing and infrastructure. And that's something that the Centre for Population were provided a study that showed if they just decrease current migration levels, I think it was by 15%, then in the next 5 years we'd end up with a surplus of housing. But again, they won't do it. So these are the things that you need to be careful when you start to talk about what happens intergenerationally, because you can blame the person that's accumulated legitimately on the rules that were set wrongly by the governments of the day. So how do we now fix it for the ones going forward? That's a whole podcast in and of itself.
I hear, Dave. I hear. What else, Dave, in terms of this, like we're Gen X, so do you think we're the forgotten generation? We're kind of like the red-headed middle child?
We are the red-headed middle child, but we're about to be unforgotten, because Australia in the next 5 or 10 years, there's going to have a massive amount of people that know a lot of stuff, master craftsmen in the trades, intelligent entrepreneurs and business leaders that are going to retire. And quite frankly, most out of the millennials and Gen Z just aren't up to it. You can DEI it all you want. You can try and run your numbers of your 30% women, your 10% three-legged, your 12% trans, black. You can do whatever you want, but at the end of the day, you need competence. And the people that have the resilience, the adaptability, the flexibility, and the work ethic that you're actually looking for in those roles, they're only in Gen X at the moment, with some rare exceptions. I know I'm always generalizing, and there's always going to be outliers in the data. But the reality is they're the generation that understand that 9 a.m. I need to be at work at 9 a.m. Finish 5, I finish at 5. I've got to get my job done. I've got asked to do something that's really important. It's got to be finished by today. I make sure it's done by today. I don't call in sick every Friday. I don't have hurt feelings when someone tells me my work needs to improve in some area. So I think, and getting back to what created this, part of it too is we did get the strap, right? You did get hit at home. And it's not child abuse, as someone thinks. When I say get the strap, 12 years, 13 years of schooling, whatever it was, or I finished in year 11, so 12 years, 11 and a half. The point being, I can remember both times I got the strap and both times I deserved it. Once was for fighting, and the other time was a little smart-ass kid that was too fast for me that I couldn't catch, and I picked up a chair and was about to throw it at him across the classroom when one of the brothers walked in. So I'm not talking about that, I've lost count of how many times I got the strap or things like that. But at the end of the day, there were repercussions for ill discipline that echo through your life if you learn the lessons early, and they echo in a positive way. I even look at the way some people dress for work. Now, we used to have to go to school with the top button done up and the tie and the shoes were shined, and they'd check your haircut. Now, I'm not saying I want everyone to be at like a military style level, but again, the reason they were doing that was because it was about instilling that self-respect of how you dressed. Keep yourself clean, neat and tidy, be polite. There are repercussions for poor behavior.
So, touched on Gen X and being sandwiched between the boomers. So, boomers just like property ownership. I think ridden the wave of a lot of good economic decisions, either by good luck or good management, or ridden the wave of the economy in Australia on the back of having a lot of dirt in the ground that people want.
There's also an element there that's to do with our migration patterns, because those boomers, a lot of them are Greek, Italian, Maltese. So to these people, they'd been through the Second World War or tough times. To them, owning your bit of dirt, and that was both in terms of security for a roof over your head, but, grow vegetables, whatever. So some of it too is not, again, it's not this nefarious go back to 1950 let's call it between 1950 and 1965, where there's this big thing of I'm going to buy up as much land as I can because come the 2000s, this land's going to be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. No, a lot of it was buy up the land so we can grow fruit and vegetables on it and we can sell and we can make a living so my family can survive. And I understand the importance of this because we just had to leave our bombed out country.
Yeah, there's There's a story I saw on the weekend of a property that's like maybe 10 acres large in the middle of a northwestern suburb development. And the owner, despite the developer offering like 50 million, never sold. Right. So there's a whole suburb in the ponds. So the little mini McMansions are there on 450 square blocks, and they're all up all the way around. Right in the middle of it, there's exactly that.
Well, one of the things I never used to agree with the American system of tax on the family home, but I'm starting to warm to it because it keeps prices down. Because your property, paying a percentage, property doesn't start to go up to $1-2 million. Because if you're paying 1% a year, who's got 20 grand a year in tax, right? So it tends to keep it down. Now, having said that, as someone that's been absolutely raped on stamp duty buying properties, I don't think if they're going to bring it in, I should now. I've already dropped, say, $70,000 way back when. In today's dollars would be $120,000 or $150,000, and then start paying tax as well. But maybe part of moving forward is that's what we do. We remove stamp duty, and we have the future generations pay a land tax annually. And property, we start to tweak things where property again becomes, it's still an investment for you, but you're not going to have an inflation rate at 3% that takes 25 years for something to double, but your property's doubling in 7 years.
Agreed. Another thing.
Say that again.
Agreed.
One more time.
Agreed.
I love it, Tone. I think my balls were just tingling as you were saying that.
One of the things I've always hung my hat on as a Gen Xer is that we were the last generation. Well, I think there's actually been a recession since, but it wasn't really a recession. We were the last generation that actually survived like an economic downturn, like a significant one. So when I was
recession we had to have.
When I was leaving school in year 12, there was no thought about going to get a job because there were no jobs. So I went and did a degree, studied at uni, all well and good. But even when I came out of uni, unemployment was sitting at around 8, 9, 10%. I remember my parents bought a block of land that they wanted to build the house on for my brother and I, and like the family home, and they were paying 18% interest rates, right?
Yeah,
and you don't forget those discussions, right? Like I was only 18, 19 myself at the time, or maybe 20 years old, so I'd started earning a bit of money. I kind of understood, but I kind of felt the anxiety and the stress that my parents were going through. And since then, and that was a recession we had to have, according to PJK. Paul Keating. But at the back end of that, we had 30 years approximately of uninterrupted economic growth.
And that's been one of the problems, right?
That's right. It's been too easy. So
way too easy.
So I know there's like a lot of angst around rents and people not being able to find housing. But when your only choice is, no, you're staying at home, and if you are staying at home, and you are working, you're going to contribute because you have to help your parents pay a mortgage to keep the house, right? And just live on basic income, on basic items, then it sharpens your focus around the choices that you make with your money.
It certainly does.
And I don't think that's been allowed to happen for the last couple of generations, because there's this inbuilt assumption, I go to school, I go and study, or I do a trade, I get a job, I get paid, I can borrow money. What if you borrow too much money and you lose your job? No, I don't lose my job. But what about if you borrow too much money and the property value goes down? No, property values don't go down. That just doesn't happen, does it? Property values don't go down. I'll always have a job, right?
Which I've always loved, the property doesn't go down, because I think I've said this to you before, but I bought my last property in the GFC, and the guy had paid like $520,000 for it 3 years earlier. Interest rates were roughly 6%. So being generous, let's say he, with stamp duty and whatnot, he earned half of it. So that was $300,000. It's $18,000 a year across those 3 years plus stamp duty. He'd done some renovations on it, and then I bought it for $550 at mortgagee and possession sale. So, and that was one of 6 that had been repossessed off him. So this concept of property never goes down. Well, we've had declines. It never goes down in the long run. You still got to facilitate your debt, if and when it falls. But the other thing that happens too when people talk about getting on the property ladder, and this is like I know, we've mentioned before, property is like 9-10x average income in somewhere like Sydney, and not far behind in Melbourne, Brisbane, big cities. Now, there are two things to it. I've said to you that even if all our policies addressed affordability overnight, do the Millennials and Generation Z have their 20% deposit at that property value at half of its current value? And the answer is no, right? So at the moment, they still get to hide behind, here's the issues created by, and boomers and government, and here's what we got fixed. Yes, you're correct. You still need to take accountability and responsibility for your side, and they're not there yet. Most of them don't have any savings. They're busy going out all the time, traveling the world and whatnot. And here's another problem. When they talk about but I want a nice house in a nice area like my parents at Castle Hill, or my parents at Borkham Hills, or my parents on the North Shore. Again, you're attempting to start where they finished. So people don't want to go back to the old, I'll get a 2-bedroom unit in North Parramatta, we'll give it a lick of paint, we'll do up the bathroom, the kitchen, we've got some hand-me-down furniture, we'll smash the mortgage for the first 4 or 5 years, and then we'll go to something bigger. So that's another problem. And some of these areas too is that people, for example, let's take, for people that know the Sydney market, let's take Balmain Leichhardt area. That's quite a sort of luxury, upmarket, big income area, not far from Sydney CBD, 15 minutes or whatever, great restaurants and whatnot. People didn't want to live there 50 years ago. They were workmen's areas. That was considered far away from the city. So people also need to understand the changes to some of these suburbs that's gone over the years. That terrace house way back when was like, you're poor. One of the reasons, do you know why the bunnies are the bunnies in the rugby league, South Sydney Rabbitohs? Do you know why they're called
No.
So a Rabbitoh was a man that used to go along selling rabbits in the area. That's what they lived off, right? Poor people in that area. Now, around Redfern, there's a lot of terrace houses and they're millions and millions of dollars. So there's a lot that's lost from people that don't understand the past and just like to point fingers and blame. And then there's a lot that does need to change, that we are in a point that I mentioned at the outset of the episode, that we're not creating the environment that's going to allow for them to live better than what we did.
What about some cultural legacies, Dave? Like you and I would go into bat for Gen X music, Gen X videos.
Music. Well, we created video games, so you're welcome to all the kids out there. My little man got a shock once when he couldn't get past something in Call of Duty, and I said, "Give it here." So what? I said, "Man, we are Commodore 64 into Atari 2600 into Sega Mega Systems and Nintendos. We're the generation." But I think culturally, so everything from the creation of the video game system, I think our music. And I know this, I said this to the Mauritian Queen yesterday. I said, if you notice, honey, every time we're watching sports, it could be something in the US, it could be something here, and the music in the background is from 30, 40 years ago. And people are singing away because they don't create that sort of music anymore. The great comedies, our generation had a really good sense of humor. So some of the stuff, the Step Brothers, the Talladega Nights, the Wedding Crashers, all that sort of stuff. It's sort of died off after us.
Yeah.
The mullet. We gave everyone the mullet.
Because if you look back, just touching back on this, like some of the challenges that Gen X have had, so we've dealt with workplace instability. We've dealt with economic restructuring. We're a bit blasé about it now, right? We're the generation kind of sat back and go, here we go. Here comes the memo. How many heads they taken out? Because that's where it was. Because post our generation, we started looking at globalization, a lot of outsourcing of things, a lot of rationalization.
But this is where I do blame the baby boomers. And again, I've just laid out you can't blame every baby boomer. I'm talking about the baby blah 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 blah. I'm talking about the baby boomer leadership that offshored all the jobs so they could increase margin for themselves and didn't think about the generations that are now finding that they don't have jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, but that develops resilience, right? And we can adapt. We have learned to adapt. And one thing I'm pretty proud of in terms of our generation is we don't play victim.
Definitely not. Right. We see those things as part of the stepping stone to our success.
That's right.
So challenges to overcome.
That's right. So every now and then, as my eldest says, you get a swinging heel kick to the nuts.
I love that saying.
Most of us would have been made redundant or on the back end of a restructure at some point. You just get on with it. So that's why now, as like a lot of things they're swinging, right, Dave? They're swinging at the moment, and they overcorrect and they come back to the center. And politically across a whole lot of Western countries, US, that's kind of happening in different forms. I don't have much sympathy for people who say, a lot of these programs at the moment are favouring a style of person or a gender or whatever it might be. Because I think over time that will correct, and it is correcting already, right?
It is correct.
Because when you start doing that and making a certain class of people the reason for your angst or the reason for your lack of progress in life, it just breeds into that victim mentality that I just can't handle, right? Oh, it's the migrants. No, it's not. Get yourself educated. You want to work? Get off your ass and work. There's plenty of work. Oh, no, it's something else. It's something else. People want someone to blame for the fact that life hasn't panned out the way it has. And I don't think as a rule, correct me on this, Dave, I don't think as a rule Gen X lend itself into that. They don't really lean into that, looking for someone to blame for things that might never worked out for them.
No, we were actually really good. One thing I would say, and this is probably only speaking really from the Australian context, but one thing I would say is because we were, like, the White Australia policy ends in 1973. I think it's 1965 the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders get the vote. So thankfully, we sort of grew up in a period with a lot of migration things coming in. So to us, it was just normal that your friend was black, your friend was Asian, your friend was Italian, Greek, whatever. You didn't care. We just used to make fun of each other, right, of each other's lunches or whatever you did, and we got on. So for us, we're probably pretty lucky. But when you say, you're 100% correct when you say anytime we get to the point that we other one group and we attribute all the ills to them, that's when there's a problem. But you've also got to be careful not to whitewash the actual problems.
Yeah.
So if someone's saying, well, we do have a problem where, X group of migrants represent 25% of the crime and they're shooting each other in the street and blah, 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 you still got to take that on board. What you've got to not take on board is say, yep, we get it. We want law and order. We want safety. But what's that got to do with you being jobless for the last 17 years? What's that got to do with you having a job you hate for the last 12 years? What's that got to do with you not being able to get on the property ladder? So you've got to dissect things without just lumping them all into one and dismissing people's concerns. But again, as I say, we didn't have that. One thing for me, I've always been, I never thought about it, but when I look at all my social circle and, the colors of the rainbow type thing, to me, I'm just happy that I've always judged people off who they are and nothing else. But going back to myself, there's two things. One is how many people would have been out of home at 16, 17, the way I was today, and would be able to go and sweep floors, take a job, survive, be resilient to go down the shops when they're closing to get the markdowns and survive, and then put yourself through uni later and achieve. And for me, as I said, I've never complained. There's plenty of people in the world that have it far worse than what I do or did. And on the flip side, I'm also one of the people that proves that overall how healthy Australia runs, because in a lot of the world, if you're out at home at 16, you're sweeping floors in a barbershop, you're never getting to university. You're never going to climb the ladder. Where we have a system that says if you want to work and you want to make something of yourself, there are no barriers to it. You can work hard, you can climb the ladder, you can go off to uni, pay the debt later, you don't have to have it up front, you're not precluded from university because you're from the wrong class or whatever it may be. So for me, I hate hearing people complain, because really I'm a pretty average guy. And if I can achieve what I've achieved, that means most people can in this country.
Absolutely, Dave. Let's we're gonna lean. What do? We don't pivot. We
do. We pivot and we circle back and we take people on. We've got all the corporate words, all the corporate words here, Tony.
What does Donnie do? He weaves.
Oh, we weave. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
He does like a weave.
How did Donnie go with his weaving with Big Vlad the other day?
He's a good weaver. Actually, some stuff I was reading is going to be interesting. It looks like we might end up with a truce there. But I think Zelensky's going to have to do a few things he didn't really want to do.
What odds, now that we've weaved?
Love a weave.
What odds that Donnie and his mate JD try and put on a show tonight when Zelensky visits the White House?
I don't think there'll be a repeat.
Because you know why? He won't be isolated, will he? I think the European leaders are going with him.
Oh, but even if they do, I don't think that really matters because Europe's found out that really has just turned itself into a vassal of the US again, and is probably regretting some of their last 20 or 30 years in energy policy and different things that's put them back under the thumb of the US. But I think what's happening is people are starting to get a bit more pragmatic. I think that the lies that Russia's losing have stopped, and people are realizing he got a pretty good stronghold. But also, the Russians are probably starting to realise that the other side's,
a bit more resilient.
They'll keep fighting.
Yeah.
Well, not resilient, but they'll cop a bit more cost than what he probably thought they would.
Yeah.
So he's probably crunching the numbers.
His starting position of negotiation is in advance of the current front line.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So
and that he'll probably get worked back to the front line.
Well, he's probably looking at and thinking to himself, I could be in this another 5 years to gain another 50 kilometres.
Yeah,
what's the cost benefit analysis? So I'll start talking Turkey now.
I suppose he's got to realise at what point he's got to try and maximise his gains in the next 2.5 years while Donny's still around, right?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because he came out and made the comment that he wouldn't have invaded Russia under a Trump presidency. Now, I'm 50-50. I'm 50-50 on this comment. Part of me is, yes, I actually think that on face value is true, because you look at, he took Crimea under Obama and he invaded Ukraine under Biden, and so some of that weakness. But then there's part of me too. It's like, blow a little bit of smoke up his ass, and we're in negotiations here, so let's massage the ego a bit.
Yeah, I get it. Now, Dave, can we take a weave back to our topic?
We can weave. We can zig. We can zag.
Just in terms of like some family and societal impacts, Gen X are the first generation who were impacted by high divorce rates, right?
Yeah, because I think we get in too easy and out too easy. I think that's self-inflicted, to be honest. Right. I think part of it...
But then that created a whole raft of issues as well for a lot of Gen X kids growing up, right?
Yeah.
Split family homes, probably a whole lot of messed up kids in terms of what that means, how they learned, how they were educated, the opportunities they had or didn't have. But again, pretty resilient.
Well, I think the no-fault divorce accelerated things. So that was a problem there. But yeah, exactly. I think that inbuilt resilience that came about from that free-range childhood meant that adulthood, we could adapt. We could roll with the punches, so to speak. We knew that things go wrong. It happens, and it's not going to kill me. So I'll get over it. I'll move on.
So I'm looking forward now, Dave, and I'm saying, so we had Gen Y, 81 to 96. So, birth of the internet, globalization, a whole lot of stuff. Then we got Gen Z, which is 97 to 2012. So a whole lot of smartphones, digital devices, everything's in their hand. The whole world's literally in their hand, right? And then the current generation is Generation Alpha. So entirely born in the 21st century, right? iPads at their side entirely. As Gen Xers, do we look, we're looking back now to look forward. As we look back to the people coming behind us, right? What hope or what, how do you feel, Dave, about the fact that we've got these people behind us who are going to be paying the taxes, that are going to be delivering the services?
Pay more.
That you and I,
on a good life.
That's
right. Simon, pay 95%. So,
that's right.
Actually, I don't think I think our taxes are too high. And that's probably one of the big things that we're really getting wrong, is getting back to that resilience. One of the things people don't have now is, someone has a cold. Like this cough, I believe, I don't have the proof, I believe my cough is related to one of two things, because I didn't have it before. It's still sticking around. It's either long COVID.
The China virus.
It's a China virus, Tony. Or it's the vaccine, right? Now, I haven't been to the doctor to find out, because you just, I'm not dying. Where people get a sniffle and they race to the doctor now. So part of that, the cost in Australia with our NDIS, which we're going to do a whole episode on, called the National Disability Insurance Scam, not National Disability Insurance Scheme.
I see what you did with that.
Nice, wasn't it? Well, actually, I've got to give credit to the Mauritian Queen. That was her one. So she said, you got to do something on it, and you got to use the acronym. What is going on with me tonight? I am. So I'm going to use the R word because I hate political correctness. I'm so retarded tonight. So, it was the Mauritian Queen that came up with that. But some of those things that we're doing, the reason those costs are blowing out, again, is people aren't resilient. I feel sad. I need a plan. I've got this cough, doc. Can you medicate me? And at some point, you've got to accept that life is going to give you a few challenges. Don't clog up the health system unnecessarily. Don't falsely claim that you need things because you got hurt feelings. This is what's driving your taxes through the roof and what's putting pressure under our social security system, because social security was meant to be just that. Because getting back to your parents, and the reason why everyone says why you're not using your own parents, Dave, is because my parents didn't come here at the end of the Second World War, so it's a good example of people that made something out of a really tough time. They didn't have all this stuff. Your dad couldn't take 6 months off and say he felt a bit sad. Everyone's calling him WOG.
I know. And
I've got hurt feelings. Can I sue somebody? Can government give me payments?
It's not a safe space.
And again, I'm not advocating here. Let's go back to calling everyone that's just come here to make a life. Let's call them WOG and let's call them names and let's make it unnecessarily hard. But let's stop the stuff that everything's a handout, because one of the reasons why your dad and your mum, are proud Australians is because they achieved what they achieved, because they built a life, because they've got 2 sons that are successful. They're not in prison. They're not drug addicted. So that's what you want your life to be. You don't want your life to be inherently looking at, I need something, who's going to give it to me. You want to look at it and say, look at what I've achieved. And that's not material.
Absolutely. So Dave, do you and I, as we wrap up here, do we actually feel heard? We've spoken about ourselves, our generation.
No one listens to us too.
Do we feel like it's a safe space here where we've been able to express our inner thoughts about our own generation? I'm actually quite proud of being a Gen Xer. I think I'm proud of what we've navigated, how we've handled it, the economic challenges, the decisions we've made, but overall the fact that we've got an approach of just get on and get shit done. And sometimes you're going to cop a smack in the mouth for some reason. You've got to get on and just, get on and achieve.
Yeah, and one of the things, when things go wrong, take the lessons out of what did you do to contribute. And I know that there are times it's going to be 99% someone else, but it's 1% you. There's always learning opportunity. Before we wrap up, I'm going to test you and see how good an Australian Gen Xer you are. So
talk to me, Dave.
So what's a tapie, Tone?
A tapie?
What's a tapie? If we were out playing cricket and I said, we'll use a tapie, what are we talking about?
I reckon you use tape on a tennis ball to create the seam of a cricket ball.
Yeah, or you'd just do one side so it would swing a country mile.
That's right.
What's a sunny boy?
Sunny boy, oh, how good. The little triangle ice blocks in the bottom of the freezer we used to pay for 10 cents. And you let them melt a bit and then it'll just break up.
And if I said fair suck of the sav, what am I saying, Tone?
Fair suck of the sausage roll.
Yeah, so fair go.
Yeah,
So if I said you want to let's go down the pub and knock the head off a frothy and have a couple of dog's eyes, what would we be doing?
Having a beer and a couple of meat pies.
We grew up in some weird times, Tone. The things that we used to say in the 80s.
I know.
And what about if I said to you, if I handed you like a can of Coke, and this is before the ring pull days where they used to have 2 push down, bigger hole, small hole, and I said, you just tooth it, Tone, what would I be saying?
Give it a bit of a shake, Dave. And in that smaller hole, just get your front tooth and just press it slightly and you get that buzz. How good. The kids at that age just don't understand.
They have no idea. And what's a catamaran? If you and your brother each has a skateboard and they said, go up the hill and catamaran down, what would you be doing?
No idea.
What you'd be doing is you wouldn't stand on your skateboard. You would sit on yours, opposite him sitting on his, and you'd put your 2 feet and he'd interlock his 2 feet and you'd go down together. So if you crashed and burned together, baby.
Oh, what a way to end it. What do we always say here, Dave?
You have a right to be wrong.
Take care, mate.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for listening to this episode, and we hope you enjoyed it. Like us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. Please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.